Yeah.
Okay. So now, can you actually now tell me your current research project, or what you do currently? Because I know I looked up your
Mm,
profile, and then you mentioned community
mm.
languages, TESOL areas, and so
I
on.
could choose community languages. I'll choose TESOL first because what I'm doing at the moment is looking at the teaching of English through science.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and a lot of the traditional stuff separates language from science. So it talks about the genres of science or it talks about the vocabulary and the grammar. But what I wanted to start with was looking at what what science is, what science learning is, and therefore what language fits into it. So it started. This will take a while, but it started with me sitting down with other science lecturers, so looking at what do we have in common.
Mm-hmm.
How do I understand science? What are the key concepts? What's the normal pedagogy, and what aligns with TESOL? And then we started working with science teachers in schools. And it was interesting because for science teachers, often they realized that science is a second language for them.
Right,
They
right.
had to learn it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I found some interesting things. So that in the science curriculum, it's very applied research. They start very much with the idea of everyday problems, then getting into scientific knowledge, and then translating that into some sort of presentation or solution for an everyday issue. And this aligned with TESOL pedagogy. So a lot of task-based learning is very much not looking just at the language, but in doing something with that and the language involved in it. So with this behind us, we started working with 10 different schools. We got the science teachers, EAL teachers working together in Sydney, yes. Lower SES schools with very low outcomes. And we got the science teachers in working with ESL teachers. How would you, what are the problems? What are the issues? What can be a task-based outcome? At one of the schools, they chose the functions of parts of the body. And a lot of these children, they interpreted for their parents with doctors. And so we got those students to be doctors themselves, and they had to work out how they would explain and give advice about different illnesses and what was wrong. And it was interesting because first of all, it started with a real life problem and it ended up with an outcome, which was them role playing as doctors. But along the way, we had to teach all the formal language.
Right.
Now, for these kids, they didn't like formal English. But when they put on the doctor's coats, they were playing a role and they used that language. You know? So I'll get to the point in a minute. At another school, it was getting the students to look at problems with iPhones. And the actual science concept was the properties of metals. And they had to look at why this phone was overheating to do all sorts of scientific experiments and then give their presentation to the board of directors. So again, informal English.
Right.
So there was a lot of literacy involved, but the outcome was actually a spoken language one. The kids did all the science experiments. And what we drew from that is that when you are looking at language-based teaching in the science, you need to look at the cognitive outcomes, the integrity of that subject area, and then everything follows from it. And we found also that when the science and the ESL teachers worked together, team teaching worked. They got on and they ended up, the ESL teachers ended up talking like science teachers. The science teachers were using the words like lexical density, scaffolding, all of the stuff.
Jargons.
Yes. So they learned from each other, and it came about because we started from the subject itself, not from an abstract view of language. Taking the most recent research into TESOL and looking at what it means in terms of content area teaching, and often the subjects, they're following the same research directions. But the takeaway message is that as a TESOL teacher, you cannot work in a subject area unless you know the concepts of that subject and the approaches to it. You know?
And again, like you probably realize that what you do actually is of interest to a lot of people in the area of English medium instruction, for example, when the focus is on the content, and the language is part of it, and they sort of integrate it that way.
I think it's really important. Usually, I think there's been too much of a split between what was traditionally TEFL and
Mm,
TESOL.
mm,
I think there is now so much overlap between them.
mm.
And one of the problems is that I think in EMI, sometimes the focus is too much on uh, sort of simplifying the content, whereas in actual fact, you need to look at the validity, the strength of the concept, but to look at the language that's possible from it, you know?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I think outcomes task-based is the best way to do it.
Oh, okay.
Mm.
Thank you for a very interesting introduction to that. But before I talk more about, ask you more about
Mm.
your community language sort of project or
Mm.
aspects of your profession. How long have you been working on this project?
This project,
Yep.
it started with an ARC about 2007. This project itself started in 2016, and we've been working on it for about 5, 6 years.
Wow. So it's a long-term, longitudinal
It's
kind
the
of.
biggest challenge, I think, in TESOL,
Mm,
because in Australia, the students do not have time to learn language by itself. They are in mainstream classes and they've got to learn language through the content
mm-hmm,
area.
mm-hmm.
No choice
So
about
you
it.
managed to track students over different years.
Yes, yes, yes.
And have you noticed any changes in students' learning or capacity?
The schools where we chose the students, they were the lowest stream class in science,
Mhm.
and they're performing at or above the best.
Oh, that's
We have the
amazing.
data to show it. But most interesting is that the science teachers themselves, all the results came back positive in
Mm-hmm.
terms of what they felt about themselves. And many of them have gone on to become TESOL teachers themselves.
Okay,
You
wow.
know?
So it's not just the students, it's
No,
also the teachers
yeah,
that will benefit
yeah.
from, that have
I
benefited
think
from
so.
this.
Subject area teachers, once they learn about TESOL, they realize how important it is because
Mm-hmm.
it's not just separating the TESOL students, it's actually teaching all of their students successfully.
Mm,
And
okay.
native speakers of English benefit from these approaches.
That's very inspirational.